Hey, so welcome back to the Flow Tribe podcast, where I get to interview the movers, breathers, teachers, healers, and creators of the world. So in this episode, I got to speak with Marc Varin. So Marc is a nutrition expert. He is actually an ex-football player turned nutrition expert. So this conversation is all about football and it's all about nutrition. Well, we talk a lot more about nutrition than we do football. But basically what Marc has done is he's dedicated himself to helping athletes better understand the importance of nutrition and then helping them get on a better path when it comes to their own nutrition. Because he said, as a football player himself, he was amazed at how badly, first of all, people were eating, but also the lack of understanding just how important nutrition is when you're an athlete. So we dive into all kinds of things. We talk about being a vegan. We talk about, the keto diet. We talk about all the different things that are out there. Marc has a really cool approach to it. What I really liked about him is that he's done it, right? He's tried these different diets. He's experimented on himself. He's done the blood work. He's done all the things you need to do to really get a great understanding of not only how to help yourself, but how to help others. So I learned a lot from this conversation. I'm pretty sure you will too. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Marc Varin. So Marc, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I'm really excited to dive into all things nutrition and football. So why don't we start off by having you introduce yourself, tell us a bit about who you are and what you do.
For sure. First, thank you for having me on your podcast. I'm a big fan of what you do, so I'm really excited to be there and get chatting about it. I'll start talking about myself. I'm now a nutrition coach. I've been doing much stuff. I'm a former football player. I now coach mostly football players. I coach other athletes like rugby and some people who are a little less into sports, like some climbers and some just like weekend warriors, if you want to. In the past, I've played football my entire life. So I stopped 2 years ago. I started when I was 11. So I played many positions. I played running back, tight end. I played on the defensive line. And all the end of my career, I was a linebacker. So that's where I played. I've never been good in my first couple of years, or I wasn't bad, but I wasn't like a great football player when I started. But by the age of like 13 or 14, like beginning of high school, I started training. I got really interested in getting better and building muscle and all of that, and that helped me like a few years later on to get like better at football. So I played for Team Quebec. I played for Team Canada, where I had the chance to win the World Cup against the US, which was a lot of fun. And then I went to CEGEP at Vanier College, where I thought that was the best opportunity for me to win a championship and also to grow as a football player and also to learn English. Because before going to CEGEP, I could barely speak any English. So I went to CEGEP there. I had the chance to win a Ball d'Or in my first year, and that's also like the moment where training became even more serious and nutrition got important in my life. So in my beginning of my second year, I tore my ACL for the first time, and at that moment, I really wanted to get like better as soon as possible so I could play and like dominate the following year. So what I did is I found like the best coach in the region. I went to his gym and he started coaching me before even surgery. So we did my nutrition and strength and conditioning. I had surgery and then I trained with him for a while and he became a mentor to me. So nutrition got really, really important. Eating 5 meals a day, training twice a day. So I was going to the gym before going to school. And then after school, I would stop back by the gym doing legs once again so I could rehab faster. And I got really, really interested into nutrition at that point. My coach he's now known as Coach Bull. He had a gym in Laval. And he also, he's the one who got really the fire in me for nutrition and training. He bought me my first books. I've never been, before much of a reader. And he got me, the Passion Test, which was a really good book. And then I read that one first, and then I read my first nutrition book, my first training book. And at that point, I really understood that's what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to become like a strength and conditioning coach and do nutrition also. So I started working for him, did a few certification in Montreal, and then I've been working and training with him until I went to college, where I played for Laval University, which is I would say like the big program university over there, like winning Vanier Cups every second year or so. So I had the chance to win 2 Vanier Cups. But my career at the college level has been a lot of ups and downs. I've been pretty banged up, had injuries. I tore my ACL 2 times again on the same knee. Had a labrum surgery in my shoulder, wrist surgery. So it's been tough. And so in 2016, what happened is that I tore my ACL the week before the Vanier Cup. So I ended up like I was pretty banged up. Ended up playing at the Vanier Cup taped, like really taped up, but didn't play well. I could barely move. And then I really wanted to find a way to recover faster. So that I got really interested in more like diving deep in nutrition. And at that moment, I really thought that going vegan was the solution for me to lower inflammation and recover faster. So I got as much information in as I could. I tried to learn as much as possible, ask questions around, follow people who I thought were good sources of information. And then I went vegan. So from December 2016 to actually last summer, so July 2020, I was vegan. So I played college as a vegan. I could still I didn't lose any muscle. I think I was still performing, but the next 2 years I've been injured. So like 2016 I tore my ACL. 2017 I had shoulder and wrist surgery, and then 2018 I played only 1 game and tore my ACL again. But there was no way I could think nutrition was a part of that. So I was still interested learning a lot about nutrition. I had a few nutrition class in college, but I didn't study nutrition in college. I did other certifications after. And then it's actually last summer, if like I decided to stop playing after my third ACL in my right knee. And then I started working in a school as a football coach. I was like managing the football program there, doing the strength and conditioning, doing a little bit of nutrition. And when COVID happened, I decided to leave before for travel. I wanted to travel more, and COVID happened, so I knew I couldn't travel. So I did my precision nutrition certification, got a lot more into nutrition, and decided to launch my own business. So it all started like it all went pretty fast in the past couple of months. So that's where I am. And then with my coach, I've done blood tests in last summer, realized that vegan might not be the best option for me at that moment. So and now I started back eating meat and having a really different diet from going back similar to what I did before going vegan, but with better quality food. So that's where I am now. I launched my business in September. I am now doing coaching, like one-on-one online for nutrition with many athletes. I do group with football teams. So I coach guys as like small groups. I'm working with 2 or 3 CJEPs at the moment. And I started doing conferences for football teams and other sports program in Quebec. So that's where I am.
All right. I have a few questions for you now.
Yeah, let's go.
I'm very interested in your decision to go vegan. I've also played around with a plant-based diet. The vegan thing sometimes I have a bit of a hard time with as a word, just because it's like a label,
Yeah.
right? And it means like because if you speak pure vegan, it's like it's not just what you eat, it's how you live, right? You
Exactly.
avoid any animal products having to do with the clothing you wear and everything that you use in your life and all that. But there was a couple of reasons. When I got into it, it was a combination of, it started off with more of an ethical thing. It was really more about not wanting to support factory farming and not being okay with the way animals were treated. But then there was a book called The Thrive Diet by Brandon
Yeah.
Fraser. I'm sure you read it.
Yeah, pretty good book.
Pretty good book. And what it was interesting to me for that was it had nothing to do with ethics. And it was really about, here are all the diets I tried as a triathlete. And this is the one that got me the best results. Pure and simple. It was a performance-based diet.
Yeah.
And that kind of opened my mind to, okay, at the time I was training MMA fighters and I was really into training. So same as you, it was kind of like, well, let's see if my performance diminishes, then I'll know. And it really didn't. Although I must say that after a few months, I was having a hard time, and I reintroduced fish, seafood, and that's pretty much how I eat now. I'd say it's mostly plant-based with fish and seafood as a protein source. But what was for you the catalyst? Like, why did you decide to try vegan first of all? And what did you notice afterwards when you went back to eating meat? What was the main difference? And you mentioned blood work, so I'd like to maybe dive into that also.
Yeah, well, it all started because a teammate of mine and a good friend in the team decided to go vegan for ethical reason. And then, so I was always interested in nutrition. So we were chatting a lot. My vision of veganism was different. I never really thought of it, but to me, it was nutrition. It was something new. So I wanted to learn something different. So I got really interested in like learning more and trying to see if it would make sense or not. And in my opinion, it did make some kind of sense. And I actually tried it for a month the spring before, just because I wanted to try. I really like to like be a guinea pig for what I like. I'm a guinea pig for whatever. So I want to try like many things, and so I can learn for myself, not just like reading and having other people's opinion. And that month went well. I had like great training. It was during the spring. I tested well. So, and then I went back to eating meat because it was just like a trial phase for me. And then I learned a lot about it. And then I thought that for performance and recovery, it was like the good thing to do. So it all started with like recovery. Having more carbs, I thought that that was the way to lower inflammation in my body. So that's how it all started. And then the more I got into it, the more it became about like ethical reasons and moral reasons, like animal welfare and industrial farming that I didn't want to support anymore. And to me, that was the option because I knew like at that moment when I was in school, I really told myself like I can't afford to eat just like grass-fed meat and like wild caught salmon and all that. So to me, like going vegan was the easier option too. And then from that point on it really started like as a plant-based diet, and then the more I got into the ethical reason and all of that, like I can't say I was vegan. Like I was buying like leather free like fake leather boots and watch and like my belt and my wallet, and so I was really into it, but I've never like wanted to push my belief on anyone. So I know like I and I never really wanted to be known as a vegan more than a plant-based because I always had a time with the word vegan because many vegan are really like strong activists, right? And they want to push it to other, and that was an issue for me. So I've never really I had identified myself more as a plant-based just for that reason too. And so yeah, so I've been vegan for a while. I mean, the first year or even more than that, like I was doing good and I felt like I was doing better when I started. And then I like life was just okay. You know what I mean? Like there was no issue for, to be honest, it's been like, it was long before I could really feel an issue. And like after 3 years, that's when I decided to lose some weight after football, drop some weight. I was still vegan. And my girlfriend actually, she was vegan too for 3 years. So when we met, she was vegetarian and then turned vegan when we started dating. And she had other health issues and more symptoms than I did. So she got her blood work done, and that was pretty alarming. So that's when she decided to incorporate back meat and fish and eggs. And in my opinion, like I wasn't there. I was still like fully plant-based for a while, and then but I really decided to get my blood work done. And when I got my blood work done and I started to do like the ex like checking the X and the O's of my blood work and how I felt and the weight I lost and I can put back on, that's where I realized that like maybe vegan or plant-based was not the best option for me. So I'm really an all or nothing guy. So like I went like vegan or plant-based cold turkey. So I did the same thing going back. Like the following morning, I had like a meat and nut breakfast. So that's how I went.
What about your blood work? What was it about the blood work that was ringing bells for you that was saying, hey, maybe I shouldn't be on this diet?
Well, first of all, my cholesterol levels were just too low, which I didn't even think was a thing. You know, like when you're
Yeah.
plant-based, like everyone's like, oh, cholesterol is bad, and like
Yeah.
cholesterol has to be low, and that's right. I mean, your HDL, LDL has to be low, but HDL is pretty important to be high to have impacts on your sex hormones and all of that. So that was the first thing. My creatine kinase were too high, so creatine kinase, and what's the other one that was high? I forget. Anyways, I had two that were high, and it felt like I was. What I realized is that I might have been like muscle wasting, if you can say. This was bad. My SHBG was bad. My blood sugar was actually pretty good for a plant-based eater. Like you could see like many plant-based eater who have like pretty high HbA1c. Mine was fine. I was by the end I was on a pretty much like lower carb plant-based diet than most. And then all my white blood cells were too low, red blood cells were too low, platelets were too low. So that was the most alarming part. Like at first I felt like I could have like some autoimmune disease or something, because that's really not normal, especially when white blood cells are low. And since, I mean, I've been pretty frustrated with the medical system here. Doctor hasn't been really helpful, so I had to do my own research, ask my coach, buy some books, and get reading on that. So it really hasn't been bad. And now I need to go. Like I just called my doctor this week, so I'm going to get some more blood work done next week.
So just to clarify for people who don't know these terms, SHBG, just looked it up, sex hormone binding globulin.
Yeah.
So that would be what, an indicator of low testosterone levels if it's too low?
It could be linked to testosterone or estrogen levels, which aren't balanced, and then it's
Right.
hard to tell. It's hard to tell when you don't have all the measures, and
Yeah.
and in Quebec, it's pretty hard to get like a full blood panel.
Yeah.
So I couldn't get all the answers, and I was asking my doctor like, I don't want my levels to be just normal, because you know like there's like the normal range, which are like this wide.
Yeah.
But if you're like 0.1 away, you're in like dangerous zone and dangerous zone. So
Yeah.
like they don't consider optimal. But since I was not in a danger zone, she didn't want to help me much. So I'm still looking to like get ways to get assessed, and that's pretty complicated. So that was one thing. I actually had to lie to my doctor to try to get in more measures. So that wasn't like the nicest thing of me, but I wanted to find a way to get more measures. So I pretty much invented some symptoms that I knew that if I would tell her, I would get the blood work that I wanted. So
you do what you got to do, man. And I understand what you're saying. I think first of all, in the medical system, especially if you're just seeing like a general practitioner doctor, their knowledge of nutrition is pretty limited.
yeah.
I mean, unless they purposely go out and educate themselves, but I'd say that especially in the more old school system, there's very little effort put into nutrition as far as overall health, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I'm curious about is I think it's a bit of a misconception, but I also think that when it comes to vegan diets, especially with men, there's a lot of talk about estrogen. There's a lot of talk that, because vegan will necessarily maybe eat more plant-based diets, more soy-based products. And then there's a lot of talk about phytoestrogen. So it can cause elevated estrogen levels in men, which would then, create a lack of balance with the testosterone and all that. So is that something you think that maybe was going on there, or?
It could have been an issue. I mean, I've always been careful with soy. For the first couple of years I was vegan, I was maybe eating like soy products once a week or so was going. Every time I was like consuming soy, I made sure it was organic. So that's something I always made like sure to keep, like to get my soy as clean as possible. I had a lot more tempeh than tofu, which I think has a big difference between the two of them. Could have been an issue. Honestly, I couldn't get my blood work for estrogen and like testosterone. I had my total testosterone level, which came back not as high as I would have wanted to, but they were in normal range. So it's hard to
Okay.
tell if there's a link. But with my doctor, I couldn't get like my free tests and all of that. So it was a little tougher. I've been careful. I think it can really be an issue especially if you buy poor quality soy, if you eat a lot of it. Like nowadays, I'm not a big fan, and we can talk about men, but I think even for women, having like unbalanced estrogen levels is not optimal in their diet. So I think soy is something you have to be really careful with. You can have some, I mean, but it's important to choose your sources wisely and the quantity you eat too. I wouldn't have tofu every day.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's it. If you're having it once a week, I really don't think it's going to have a huge impact on your blood work or your performance or anything like that, right? But I think what I think the mistake a lot of people make is, I think my wife kind of did this early on, right before we met. She had decided to try a vegan diet, and she basically was eating veggie burgers every night. you know and
Yeah,
and even like if you look at like these new Beyond Burgers and all that stuff, like the ingredients are not
this
good.
is crazy.
It's not like they do whatever they can to make it look and taste like meat, but it's just not real food. And like I'm probably as guilty as anyone else. It's like, well, at least I'm eating this and saving animals, great, but like what am I doing to my body, by eating these products? um so I think that's a thing. It's fine to eat plant-based, but be careful about what you're choosing. I think a lot of people also don't balance things out. They're not getting the some of the nutrients that once you give up meat, you're also giving up certain nutrients.
Yeah,
You got to find a way to get those back. And it's fine to just eat, ethically, but are you balancing things out? And I think especially if you're an athlete, right? If you're putting your body, especially in a sport like football, where you're really pushing your body to its limits, and if you're not providing your body with the nutrients it needs to heal and to stay healthy, then you're going to have some pretty serious issues, I would think, right?
exactly. I totally agree. And I don't want to say that like vegan is bad or it's like no one should be vegan. Because I mean, I'm coaching a vegan football player, vegetarian rugby player, and I really want to help them. But the thing they have to understand is that they have a lot more work to do. They have
Mhm.
like, there's a lot more, like you have to do your homeworks. I mean, I thought I did my homeworks well and didn't turn out like so good for me. I think like my vegan athletes, I ask them to get blood work done more often than the other ones. I want to make sure they stay healthy and that everything is good. So there's so many things, like you have to be careful, you have to really be compliant to, like if you don't want to go past beside like your B12, you need to supplement it, and iron and so many other ones that like your D3 levels, like especially if you're in Canada, like you're not going to get enough from D2. It's not, you're not going to get enough of it. And then EPA and DHA are so complicated to get as a plant based. Like you get some in spirulina and algae oil or whatever, but it's so not like it's not as bioavailable for your body. So you would need like so much more. Like we often hear like plant-based eaters who tell you that they eat chia seeds and flax seeds so they get all their omega-3s, but if you actually count what they absorb, it's minimal. Like you would have to like just shove chia seeds in your mouth all day to get enough, you know what I mean? So many things you have to be careful with, especially if you want to perform and live optimally. If your goal is to save animals and you think that's the way to save the planet, that's fine with me. I don't want to argue. But if you want to optimize your health and your performances, you have to be open and be ready to learn and maybe like change your beliefs if you need to.
So, other than, I mean, vegan diets, primal diets, keto diets, so many diets now. But as an athlete, now you're coaching football players, let's say, what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make? Never mind vegan, I'm just talking about general nutrition. What are mistakes that you think, especially young athletes, right? Because I think a young athlete, like if I think back to when I was, in my teens or even my 20s, you can kind of get away with eating whatever you want, right? And you're still going to perform, right? Because if you're a great athlete with great genetics, your genetics often allow you to eat poorly and still perform well until you don't, right? Until you get
Yeah.
injured, until you get to a certain age. And I think you see it a lot where guys are in great shape until they hit their 30s, for example, and then suddenly things start to slow down. And this is where their really poor eating habits start to catch up to them, right?
Yeah.
But I also think that what we used to consider great performance is we're now seeing there's a whole other level of athlete. And I think the reason we're seeing that now in younger players or even some of the newest stars in the NFL, for example, is that these are guys that grew up in the weight room. They grew up with these incredible trainers and knowledge that just didn't exist 20 years ago, right? So
Yeah.
what, in your opinion, what are some of the biggest mistakes that young athletes are making when it comes to their nutrition?
I've noted a lot, and actually, like young athletes make mistakes, but the reality is the pro athletes I talk to and I assessed are pretty similar.
Okay.
Like a lot of football players actually still eat like 12 years old boys. Like the first big mistake I see is that guys are not eating enough protein.
Okay.
And to be like,
Like
you have to
super high
understand
carb, basically.
exactly
Yeah.
super high carb, and they're not eating as like enough protein. Like to them, like having two toasts with peanut butter and a banana and fruits in the morning, while they have their protein in peanut butter, right? And they would think that's enough, and then they would have like a, I don't know, like a few eggs or a chicken breast at lunch, and then a low like piece of shrimp in their pastas at night. So I think that's the first issues. And football, like it's a tough sport. You need to put on a lot of muscle because you need to build yourself like a body armor, right? Because it's pretty tough. So building muscle is really important. And if you're eating like 0.5 grams of protein per pound, you're not going to make it. I don't think so. So that's the biggest issue. And then guys don't really, they don't have the knowledge nor the skills to understand that health should be first. Most guys, like they don't care. It's all about calories in, calories out. So they eat a lot, and that's an issue. Like I haven't yet met one athlete that doesn't have a coach who eats enough protein or vegetables. So that's the first thing. And then, as you said, like too much carbs. So every meal is based around carbs, right? So oatmeals or bread for breakfast, and then a ton of rice at lunch, and then some pasta or whatever at night. And I have no issue with carbs. Like I eat carbs every day. Most of my athletes eat carbs like every day or most day of the week, depending on their goals. But that's the main issue. And then we could go for a while, but processed food is really an issue, and it's for everyone, not just football players and athletes. But I think like processed food is really a big issue. They rely a lot on protein bars and Cliff bars and all the other like processed food they have, or drinking juice and Gatorade and all the like these processed food were labeled and thought is good, but they really aren't when you think of it. And I talked about it last week in my conference with Limoilou, a football team in Quebec, and they really realize that they make like poor decisions. And I think it all starts with breakfast. So most guys like don't eat enough of breakfast or skip breakfast, and I'm like, we're talking football players now. So like for you and I, we're not like playing football or doing like some crazy sports right now. So I don't think that you need to have breakfast like when you wake up. Like I really think breakfast is the most important meal of the day, but the time at which you have it doesn't really matter depending on your goals, right? But football players really like eat poor breakfast. I see a lot of that. And then they don't know enough about fats and don't eat enough fats. Like no, people are scared of fats, and then they just don't have it. They have salad with fat-free dressings, and then they find a way to cook their proteins without fats. And I think that's another big issue if we talk health. So that's most of it. I know I went like
No,
every
that's
way they could.
exactly, but that makes sense to me. And I think, like you said, they eat like 12-year-old boys.
Yeah, that's exactly what
But
it
then
is.
again, I think it's also generational, right? Like if they eat like that at 12 years old, it's because their parents allowed them to eat that way.
Yeah,
I think that it goes back, if I think when I was 12, maybe a little bit older, is when my mother was diagnosed with high cholesterol levels. And so suddenly everything was low fat. It was low fat mayo, low fat this, low fat that. I mean, that was the thing, right? Like this is a way back, but low fat became the trend. Everything was low fat. And if you had a fridge full of low fat products, you were healthy, right? And it wasn't until not that long ago that suddenly it's like, stop, fat is good,
yeah.
right? And I actually took I studied animal biology at McGill.
Okay.
And so I had a chance to take some nutrition classes. And I remember it was Nutrition 101, I guess. And the professor basically explained the way that sugars are metabolized in our system. And he's basically showing us the transformation process of the sugar that you eat is then transformed into the fat that you have on your body. And
Yeah,
the fat that you eat is transformed into energy that your body uses. And I was like, whoa, like it blew my mind. It blew my mind. And this is Nutrition 101. It's something that everybody should know when you think of it.
yeah,
But that's not what we're taught, right? We're taught that if you're an athlete, what you should eat before a game a couple hours before is a huge bowl of pasta, get all those carbs in there. That's your fuel, right? And suddenly he's like, no, not exactly, right? Yes, if you are super athletic and super active, you will burn off those calories. But most people will eat that big bowl of pasta, then go sit on a chair all day, right? And then that sugar, which isn't being used for energy, is going to be transformed and stored for later. But the later never comes because you're never going to end up using it. So it's just this cycle of, more sugars going in, getting processed, turned into fats, and then you're not eating any fat. So you're actually not at all in balance. And that to me was like, wow, I can't believe I didn't know that. Right. And this is something we should be taught like when we're kids, I think. Did you agree with
I
that?
I totally agree, and that's why like if you go on my social media, I talk a lot more about fats, and it's not just because I think you should only eat fats and not carbs, but I think like people are so accustomed to carbs and like they know carbs and they eat carbs. So I talk less about carbs and more about fats to try to get people to understand that fat is important, and there are so many easy ways to get more fats and be healthy and try to break the myth. So I totally agree. I think we're just like the ratio of carbs to fat is probably just flipped over of what it should be.
And what are some of your favorite sources for like healthy fats?
I have many. I love avocados,
Yeah.
olive oil. Honestly, I grass-fed butter. I think I use it every day. So coconut oil, MCT oil. I'm a big fan of nuts. So I have nuts once or twice a day, or seeds like hemp seeds, chia seeds, flax seeds. I talked about it earlier. I still have them, not every day, but almost. Uh, I like. I'm a big fan of fats, so I eat a lot of fats. I think it's really important for you to eat enough. I'm experimenting with higher fats, lower fats, trying different stuff. But I think that the more fats I have, the better I feel, and my body composition improves. And I see it with most of my athletes. Like, and the thing is, especially football players, like people are addicted to carbs. So when you want them to eat more fats, they all have a hard time eating enough fats, and so. But olive oil is really one of them to make it easy, like as a dressing. And then I always make sure I cook with a lot of fat. So it could be lard, it could be grass-fed butter, it could be many things. There are also avocados, I think, are great.
But I also think that because I've done quite a bit of research on ketogenic diets, and because I was very curious about it,
Yeah,
I think it's a very difficult diet to sustain. My wife eats more or less that type of diet, and as the resident cook in the house, I've had to learn how to keep that up. I've tried it a little bit. It's definitely something I would struggle with. And I think the issue is really, as far as I understand it, is that we have two different systems right in place. We have a carb based system and a fat based system when it comes to energy. And you can transition from having a more carb based system to a more fat burning system, but the body has to adapt for that to happen properly,
yeah,
right? So there's going to be and even I think there's even an in-between thing where if you're a super high carb diet person and you're suddenly transitioning to less carbs and more fats, there's going to be a little period where your body's just not really happy, right?
Sure.
Where suddenly and I think it is an addiction. I think it's not only your physical self that's expecting more carbs, but it's also that you're addicted to those foods. And when you take
Yeah.
them away, your body's going to be like, hey, where's my good stuff? What's going on here? So you have to kind of give it a chance. And I think a lot of people give up before their body has a chance to adapt. They're like, oh, it's been a week. I feel like crap. Screw this. I'm going back to how I used to eat. And they just don't give it a chance to kind of get into that transition. Is that something you've noticed with athletes where they just can't give it enough time to see the results and they just go back to the way they used to eat?
Sort of, because the way I coach is more long term. Like I don't
Yeah.
have any athletes that I coach only for a month or two. So everyone I coach is for a year.
Okay.
But I've seen it as guys that were eating a lot of carbs, and then I tried to get them to eat more fats and less carbs. Not just like it depends on their body composition. Like I really play with that. But some guys, like I lower their carbs, and then there's so like people around them, and there's so many misconceptions that they're really like convinced that they need carbs to lift enough, like to lift more weights, and I think it's hard. So the way I usually work with guys is I don't like take it away at once. It's too tough for them.
Of course.
So I go gradually, like I try to lower it, modify breakfast and then modify lunch and then another meal. And then at some point, like if we need to, I'll just like go for a week or two. That's going to be like really, really low carbs. So your body becomes more adapted. If like, I'm not a fan of the word like fat adapted or whatever, but more metabolically flexible and becomes like better at handling fat and using fat as a source of energy. So that's something I do. But a lot of people like they give up too quickly. I think I know it's hard. Like I tried like a really keto diet for last last summer. I wanted to give it a shot, and to be honest, after 7 to 10 days, I felt terrible.
Yeah.
But then I really like I started to feel pretty good. So I think you actually really need to give it time. I don't think that like going keto is the option for a football player, or at least not for a while, unless he's really overweight. So that's a different issue. And we see a lot of that. Like it's crazy how most football players, like receivers who are like skinny or O lines, they're all too fat. Like none of them are well, not many of them are lean enough. I think we see a lot of skinny fats and they try to put on muscle, but being fat doesn't help them build muscle. The same thing, like O linemen and D linemen, they want to be heavy, right? They need to be heavy to play their position. But I think like most of them, like they have to do a better job at getting leaner and building more like lean muscle mass. So yeah.
Is that something you've seen in football? I'm curious to know where, especially when you're talking about O line or even D line, where a lot of these guys are encouraged to just put on mass. Like coaches don't really care where that mass comes from. They just want you they want you to fill out a lot of space, right? To make it hard for guys to get by you. But what I think we're seeing now is you're seeing, even on the O line, you're seeing guys that aren't as fat,
Yeah.
but that are just big dudes that carry themselves really well. They can run, they can move. They just found a way to balance the size with the muscle, with the performance. And I think that slowly we're starting to see that, right? Where you can still get big and put on a decent amount of size, but do it in a healthier way where you'll still be mobile and you'll still be metabolically healthy, which is, I think, a good term you just threw out there. So
Yeah.
is that something you're seeing, like guys that are putting on size, but doing it in a better way?
I agree. I mean, the game has changed a lot in the past like 10 years or so. Like I remember when I was younger, I was a big fan like of I would just like linebackers like the Brian Urlacher and Patrick Willis, like linebackers like back then were like 250, 260. O linemen were like really big. Same thing for D line. Most of them were really big and bigger than we see now. And now the game evolved. Guys are faster, more mobile. So that changed the game a little. And then like, and I think it's for the good of the game. Like the game's getting better. Guys are getting healthier. They're getting leaner, and you have like I can think of like Aaron Donald, right? I don't know if you've seen Aaron Donald, which is in my opinion like best or top three defensive player in the league. The guy is like 295 and he has like a six pack. The guy is
Yeah.
jacked. It's crazy. And I think that's where like we should be heading, and it really is possible to do so if you train accordingly. Um, Training is another issue. I think most football players do too much of like conditioning, too much running, cardio, and too much explosive stuff, and not enough like building muscle. I don't think most football players are big and strong enough, and that goes hand in hand with nutrition and body composition. But yeah, we see it. Like guys are really like improving. In the NFL, it's crazy. CFL, I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah.
In the Canadian Football League, but in the NFL, we see it. Like these O linemen who have bigger chests than bellies. Like we couldn't see that 15 years ago, but now we do. So I think it's great.
Well, I think a big difference with the NFL and CFL is the motivation behind the work, right? Like if you're in the NFL, you're getting paid. And so
Yep.
your motivation to stay stronger, faster, and all that is probably higher than a CFL guy who also has a day job, who has to balance things out. And I mean, it's just not. But again, and I think it's more for me, it's more about the youth, right? The college level, the high school level,
Yeah.
and realizing like the work you put in now, the habits you pick up now are going to pay off later on. If you are serious about performance, then you have to start early, right? Don't just count on your athletic ability, also focus on everything else. I worked in a lot of performance gyms, and to see 12, 13, 14-year-old kids in there killing it and doing everything, man, they're on top of it. This kid, he had his food journal. He's in the gym 3 days a week. He's doing strength training, mobility training. And I remember talking to this one kid and I was like, what's the motivation? He's like, I want to be the best. And this is what the best do. Right. And I'm like, there you go. But that's not every kid. Like, obviously, most kids just don't think that way. But I always thought, like, wow, if only we could find a way to get that motivation higher, and for kids to understand, like, if you put in that work now, it's going to pay off down the line. Right.
Yeah.
Because I think it's habit based. It's so much harder in your 20s to completely shift things if you've never done it before. Right.
Yeah. The shift is so much like it's so much harder. And I think like most kids and there's a big like cultural shift that has to be done towards like nutrition and health. I see it a lot. Like even in college, most guys don't take it seriously until the draft year.
Yeah.
So they eat whatever and they do like the school's training, which sometimes is good, sometimes is not, depending on where you go. And I don't want to talk about it, but nutrition wise, like not many guys like around, at least in Canada, like in the US, I think they have better support. But in Canada, like most guys don't eat well, and then it's their combine and draft year. So now they need, okay, now I'm gonna step it up. Now I'm gonna get a coach. But I don't think that's the way. Like if you want to be a pro and be the best, I think you have to start to act like it way before. It's not a 6 month thing. It's gonna be much easier to take in the habits and start like learning and being better and just learning how to cook and how to build good meals younger. And then it's just like you're just gonna get better and better and better. And I think that's an issue, and I'm trying to do my best to empower guys to take actions earlier and focus on their health. I think that's the other thing. Like we have to stop seeing health and performance as two different things. I think it really goes hand in hand. So, but I totally agree. It's habit based, as you said.
Yeah, and I think something else that couple things. I forget who was interviewed, but they were asking them what was the main difference. This was an NFL player. They said, what was the main difference between college and then moving up to the pros? And they said the difference is autonomy. In college, everything's done for you. In college, they tell you when to go to the gym, they tell you what to eat, like everything, you're basically followed around. And I've heard from friends who played NCAA basketball, and they're like, it's crazy. Like you're basically their employee in a sense. Like they have spies that follow you around to make sure that you're going where you're supposed to be going. You really don't have much say in anything. Like you're here on a scholarship, kid. Guess what? We own you and you're going to do exactly as we say. But in a way, it's like, he's like, I didn't have to think about anything. This is when I go work out. This is when I go to practice. This is when I eat. And he's like, and then you get to the pros, and this is what the pro player was saying, is like, suddenly it's all up on me. Like the facilities are there. Like I have access to an amazing gym. I have access to all these things, but it's up to me to decide when that's going to happen. It's up to me to decide if I'm going to wake up early and hit the gym, or if I'm going to stay late and hit the gym. It's not as easy. And if you don't have that ability to kind of take care of yourself in that way, I think that's where a lot of the guys struggle, right? Is that something you've ever kind of thought about, or like that transition from college and then trying to go to a professional level?
A little bit, but I think in college there's still more flexibility than well, in Canada it's different than in the
Yeah,
US. You don't
probably.
like the schedule are not as tight, at least not always. Like you have some team training, but at some other moment you can go train on your own. So you have like this flexibility already in college, and when you go like younger than that in CJEP, well, it's whatever you want. You know what I mean? So that's a big issue. I think that with the pros, for sure, they get like to reality where it's all in their hands, and they maybe haven't learned how to take actions and make the right decisions for them. So I think that's an education thing that should be done earlier. So in college, it's good they have their schedule, and I think they're getting like really drilled into doing the right thing. But I think at some point they should transition into teaching them how to make the decision for themselves
Yeah.
and how to build their schedule themselves. I think that's another issue that we see a lot for at least for athletes who are really busy with school training and also have a part-time job and everything that goes with it.
And so another thing that I'm super interested in, and this is something I talked about on another episode with a trainer, and we talked more about the training aspect, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on nutrition, is I think that when it comes to training, you can train for performance and you can train for longevity. And those two things don't always match up, right? Because if I think of like my sport was MMA and I trained up with a lot of professional fighters, and you would go through hell in your strength and conditioning sessions because the goal was to make the strength and conditioning session so intense that the fight seemed easy, right? That was the idea, but it wasn't always done in a way that was best for your body, right? The thought wasn't, is this what's best for this person's body? Is this what's best for their performance? It was more like, how hard can I make this workout? I want this guy to puke at the end. And I've seen so many trainers take that approach where it's more like, I'm going to break you, but then at the end, you're going to be happy about it because your fight's going to seem easy. But to be honest, it doesn't always work out that way. There's a lot of injuries that happen in strength and conditioning sessions. There's a lot of guys that are burnt out by the time they get to their fight because they just train too hard. And
Yeah.
so when it comes to nutrition, I'm thinking that there's probably some similar thoughts there, some similar things where you can eat for performance, but sometimes it's not the best thing if you're looking at a long-term idea, right? Would you agree with that? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I sort of agree. I think that the main like, thing we hear, and I think it's changing, but for performance, what we hear like in general is more high carb and guys need to eat more and just like it's calories in, calories out. But I think there's a certain movement that's coming along like that health is starting to be prioritized, and that's the way I work. I mean, as I said earlier, like to me, like health is performance. They really go hand in hand, and I think that by improving health, you will automatically improve performance. And the same thing goes for so I see it really similar. I think there's a few differences in terms of if we talk about football players who are training twice a day and need to put on a lot of muscle, well, definitely these guys are going to need to eat more protein, maybe eat more meals, maybe eat more carbs, maybe have carbs in intro workout depending on the kind of training they do. And I don't think that most people that's something they need if we want to talk longevity. I don't think that if we talk longevity and health, I don't think you need as much protein. You still need a lot to because I mean muscle mass is one of the best indicator of like health as you grow older. But like there are a few subtle differences, but I think like most of all the goal is to one get your inflammation as low as possible, no matter if you're a football player or a rugby player or an average Joe who just wants to be healthier. So inflammation has to be as low as possible, and it goes hand in hand with performances and recovery. Second, and then glycemic variability, insulin sensitivity. I think it's important for everyone. So that's like my second because I see nutrition in like three main lenses, right? So there's inflammation, there's glycemic variability, insulin sensitivity, and then there's like hunger. So these are like the three questions I always ask myself when I want to give like recommendation to someone about food. So is this going to be inflammatory for your body? If so, don't eat it. Is this going to spike your blood sugar and eventually make you insulin resistant? If so, don't eat it or just time it at the right moment. And then, is this going to leave you hungry and have cravings all day? If so, don't eat it. So that's the three main way I see nutrition. I think it's the same thing for most. And then it's just how you play with it and the timing of food that's more different.
Yeah, I think timing is a big factor, right? Where you could eat like a huge meal, but then if you wait too long to eat again, then you're maybe going to overeat because you're super hungry. As where had you eaten like something smaller in between those two big meals, maybe that would give you more control over the next meal because now it's more science and less I just want to eat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Another thing you just mentioned was hunger, which was interesting. Is when I was experimenting with higher fats, lower carbs, I noticed that that higher fat diet takes away a lot of that hunger issue, where the body seems to have less of those cravings, those intense hunger cravings that I would get if I was on more of a high carb diet. Right. And I think that's one of the cool things about upping your fats and lowering your carbs is you feel a little more in control of your need to eat, right? Where
Exactly.
suddenly you're like, oh, I can get away with just having a smaller meal or having just a snack instead of trying to load up because I'm starving because the pasta I ate a few hours ago is gone and now my body wants more. Does that make
And
sense?
yeah, exactly. You have this big bowl of pasta and then you feel full for a while. Blood sugar is really high, you feel good, and then when it drops, you just get hungry, get more cravings, and just want to eat whatever on what's on hand. So
Yeah.
that's a low, like that's how I work with most of my athletes. We go with high fats and protein most of the day, especially breakfast to stabilize hunger all day. So most guys I start working with, they tell me when before we start working together that they have breakfast and then they have a snack and then they have lunch, then they have a snack, then they have supper, then they have another snack. And that's really how it is because they're always hungry. And then first thing I usually do is switch up the breakfast for a higher protein, like a lot more protein and more fats. And then they're like, I'm not even hungry to have lunch. Like I'm gonna have lunch because I need to, but I'm not hungry to have it. So I think that really helps a lot, like cutting out the processed food and especially snacking. I'm not like, to be honest, I'm not a big fan of snacks because most of the time snacks are much lower quality food. Like not
Yeah.
always, but it's never like as nutrient as a meal. So I like my athletes to have like more like could be smaller, but meals. Like I don't believe in snack much, and I could give them like some ideas and options if they really need to. But I'd rather an athlete have like 4 real meals than 3 meals and 2 snacks or whatever.
Yeah.
So protein every time, like protein at every meal, vegetables at every meal, some sort of fats at every meal, more in the morning, less at night. And then I keep the carbs for the night. So it helps you recover, sleep better, and then you're going to bed. So you're not going to crave more sugar after that, right? So you're not going to get hungry. You're going to go to sleep. So I think it's a good timing to have your carbs.
And okay, and to wrap this up, what do you think? So I'm an athlete. I want to get started. What's the first thing I should do? Let's say I know that I'm not eating well. I reach out to you. What does that look like? If I want to take a little bit of control over my nutrition, what do you think are the first things that I should absolutely start with and then kind of build on from there?
The first thing I tell all my athletes is to have a better breakfast. So meat, nuts, and berries for breakfast. I think that's the biggest game changer. So once you do that, and then the rest just becomes easier. You have less cravings, you feel better, your energy is more stable, you don't have like your energy steady through the day. And then every time you eat, make sure there are like a lot of protein. So most of my athletes, I like every time they eat, they should have at least 40 grams of protein, if not more, depending on the size. So if you have like 40 grams at breakfast, 40 grams at lunch, 40 grams at dinner, well, you're just at 120, which is not enough. So you should like prioritize this and then eat as much vegetable as possible. Like I'm a big fan. I sort of, yeah, big fan of Mark Hyman and his vegan diet like idea. I'm somewhere in there and what I think is best. But like eat, like load up on vegetables and just focus on getting your proteins in. And if you eat enough protein, I usually like the rest just gets into place. You have less space for like carbs and cravings, and then like all the rest becomes easier. So find yourself some good protein, some good vegetables, and then I think everything goes hand in hand.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing with carbs is once you're able to start reducing the amount of carbs that come in, the cravings start to diminish, and it just makes the whole transition so much easier, right?
Yeah,
I think
takes a
carbs,
few days.
yeah, it's more of an addiction than anything else, right?
I totally agree.
All right, Mark. So, how can people connect with you? You've got some really cool ideas. So, if I'm a young football player and I want to learn more about how I can, improve my nutrition, how can people connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm most active on Instagram. My Instagram page is marcvarin.nutrition. Same name on Marc Varin Nutrition on Facebook, which is pretty much the same content. I'm just not as good with Facebook as Instagram. So that's the best place to reach me if you want to just like give me a follow, a DM, and we can get talking. We could hop on a call and see how I could help you. And that's the easiest way to get to reach me. Or yeah.
Amazing. Well, Mark, thanks so much for taking the time, and I can't wait to share this and hopefully help some people start eating a little bit better.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity to be there and talk to people.
Awesome.